There is a moment, and you will know it when it comes, because your body will know it before your mind does. When you are standing in a room full of people who need you, and something inside you simply refuses to stand up one more time, not because you are weak, not because you have failed them, but because a voice older than your own personality has finally spoken, and it has said one word, enough. You will feel it in your jaw, clenched from 1,000 swallowed truths. You will feel it in your shoulders, bowed from carrying what was never yours to carry. And in that moment, something that has worn your face for years, smiling when it wanted to weep, agreeing when it wanted to refuse, absorbing when it wanted to release, will begin for the first time to crack. This is not a breakdown. Listen to me carefully, because this is the whole of what I have come to say to you tonight. This is not a breakdown. This is the beginning of the only life that was ever truly yours. I do not say this lightly, and I do not say it to flatter you. I have spent a lifetime listening to the human soul confess itself to me in the quiet hours, and I have learned that there is no creature more misunderstood, more quietly exhausted, and more dangerously self-forgetting than the one the world calls the empath. You have been called sensitive as though it were a diagnosis. You have been called too much as though your depth were an excess to be trimmed rather than a gift to be honored. And somewhere along the way, so long ago, you may not even remember the exact afternoon it happened. You learned to survive by becoming what others needed you to be. You built a mask, not out of vanity, but out of love and out of fear and out of the desperate childhood logic that said, if I can feel what they feel, perhaps I can keep them from leaving, from breaking, from raging. Perhaps if I become soft enough, agreeable enough, endlessly available enough, I will finally be safe. Tonight I want to speak to that mask directly. I want to speak to the part of you that has performed sensitivity as a service rather than lived it as a truth. And I want to tell you, with the full weight of everything I have witnessed in the human interior, that the mask is not you. It was never you. It was a costume assembled in childhood out of necessity, refined in adolescence out of fear, and worn in adulthood out of habit so deep you have mistaken it for your face. But a mask, however long it is worn, however perfectly it has molded itself to your features, can always be removed. And what lies beneath it, what has been waiting beneath it, patiently for years, sometimes for decades, is not empty. It is not a void where a self should be. It is in fact more real, more powerful, and more alive than anything the mask ever showed the world. Let us speak plainly about what a role is, because I think you have confused your role with your reality for so long that the two have fused in your mind like scar tissue. A role is a function you perform for the benefit of a system larger than yourself, a family, a friendship, a workplace, a marriage. The role of the healer, the role of the peacekeeper, the role of the one who always understands, who never needs to be understood in return. Every family has one, every friend group has one, every wounded system searches, almost by instinct, for the person whose nervous system is generous enough, permeable enough, to absorb what the others cannot hold. And if you are here tonight, listening to these words with a recognition that feels almost frightening in its accuracy, then you already know, you have known for years, that you were chosen for this role before you ever consented to it. Nobody sat you down and asked whether you wished to become the emotional custodian of everyone around you. You simply began, as a child, to notice the tension in a room before anyone spoke a word. You began to adjust your voice, your face, your very breathing to keep the peace that the adults around you could not keep for themselves. And you were praised for it. You were told you were mature, wise beyond your years, a comfort, a gift. And so the role calcified into an identity, and the identity calcified into a mask, and the mask has been doing your living for you ever since. I want you to understand something that took me the better part of my working life to fully grasp. A mask is not inherently a lie. The Greeks who first gave us the word understood this. The persona was the mask the actor wore upon the stage, and it was necessary because no soul could walk naked through the marketplace of ordinary life and survive the exposure. We all need a face to show the world. We all need a container for our conduct, a way of relating that allows us to function among other people without shattering every social contract with the rawness of our interior. This much is simply the price of civilization. But there is a vast and consequential difference between wearing a mask and becoming one. There is a difference between having a persona and being possessed by it. And the empath, the sensitive one, the feeler, the absorber, is at the greatest risk of all human types of this particular possession, because your mask works. It works beautifully. It earns you love, gratitude, indispensability. People tell you that you are the reason they survived their darkest year. People tell you they do not know what they would do without you. And so why would you ever take the mask off when the mask is bringing you such abundant proof that you are needed? Here is why. Here is the terrible arithmetic that no one warns you about. When you first learn to make yourself indispensable to the emotional lives of others, every time you absorb what is not yours, you set something of your own down to make room for it. Every time you perform calm you do not feel, you widen the distance between your outer conduct and your inner truth, and that distance does not remain empty. Nothing in the psyche remains empty for long. What you refuse to feel, what you refuse to express, what you set aside again and again in service of being needed, it does not vanish. It goes somewhere. It goes into the basement of you, into the region I have spent my whole life trying to persuade humanity to stop fearing and start befriending. It goes into the shadow. And here is what almost no one tells the empath, the giver. the endlessly understanding one. Your shadow is not made of cruelty, though you fear it is. Your shadow is not full of monstrous selfishness waiting to erupt and destroy everyone who has ever loved you, though some quiet terror in you may believe exactly that. Your shadow, if you dared to walk down into it honestly, is full of your own unmet needs. It is full of the anger you were never permitted to express because someone else's anger always took precedence over yours. It is full of the exhaustion you smiled through. It is full of the desires you postponed indefinitely because desiring anything for yourself felt, on some deep unconscious level, like abandoning your post. It is full quite simply of you, the parts of you that were never allowed to be inconvenient. This is why the mass cannot hold forever. This is why, if you are the one everyone leans on, you will eventually reach a night. Perhaps you have already reached it. Perhaps it is why you are listening to these words at this very hour, when your body will refuse to perform the role one more time. It may come as an illness, it may come as a sudden and inexplicable rage that frightens you with its intensity. It may come as a numbness so total that you can no longer locate the caring you have built your entire identity upon. It may come as tears in the middle of an ordinary afternoon with no explainable cause, simply because the dam has finally, after decades, given way. Do not be afraid of this moment. Do not rush to medicate it into silence, to explain it away, to apologize for it, and rebuild the mask more quickly than before. This moment, however frightening, is not your undoing. It is your unveiling. I have sat across from so many souls in this exact condition, brilliant, generous, endlessly attuned to the suffering of others, and utterly, catastrophically disconnected from their own. And I have learned to recognize, in the particular quality of their exhaustion, not sickness but summons. The psyche does not break a person for no reason. It breaks the mask because the mask has become a prison, and something within, something wiser than the conscious mind, has decided that imprisonment is a worse fate than the terror of change. This is not pathology. This is the oldest and most necessary movement of the human soul, the movement out of a false, adapted self and into the larger, more complicated, more honest self that has been waiting the entire time. Let me tell you what I have observed again and again in the ones who finally let the mask fall. They do not become cruel. This is the great, unfounded fear that keeps so many of you locked in performance for years past the point of your own collapse. The fear that if you stop giving endlessly, if you stop absorbing everyone's discomfort, if you say a true no instead of a diplomatic yes, you will become the very selfishness you have spent your life protecting others from. But this fear mistakes the shadow for the whole of what lies beneath the mask, and the shadow is never the whole. Beneath the performance of endless giving is not a monster of pure self-interest. Beneath it is simply a person with limits, with needs, with the same right to be tired that you have always so generously extended to everyone else. Reclaiming your shadow does not turn you into what you feared. It turns you into someone whole. And a whole person gives differently than a fractured one. A whole person gives from abundance instead of from depletion. A whole person can say no to a request and still love the one who made it. This is not a smaller love than the love you gave while wearing the mask. It is, in fact, the only love that was ever entirely real, because it is finally, at last, chosen rather than compelled. I want to speak now about the particular cruelty of the role that has been assigned to you, because I do not think it has been named honestly enough. The empath's role in most families, most friendships, most institutions is to feel so that others do not have to. You become the container into which unprocessed grief, unspoken resentment, and unmetabolized fear are quietly poured, generation after generation, conversation after conversation, until you no longer know which feelings in your chest originated in your own life and which were simply handed to you by people who could not bear to hold them themselves. This is an extraordinary burden to carry, and I want you to understand something crucial. Carrying it does not make you strong in the way the world has told you it does. It makes you invisible, because a container has no shape of its own. A container exists only in relation to what is poured into it. And if you have spent your entire life being poured into, then somewhere along the way you may have lost the ability to answer, honestly and immediately, a question as simple as, what do I want? Not what is needed of you, not what would keep the peace, not what would make someone else's pain more bearable. What do you, in the quiet, unguarded center of your own being, actually want? If that question produces a kind of static in your mind, if you find yourself reaching for an answer and coming up with nothing but the reflexive impulse to think of someone else's needs first, then you have found, with startling clarity, exactly where the mask has done its deepest work. And I want to tell you, without any softening, that this condition is reversible. It is not a permanent feature of your character. It is an adaptation, and every adaptation, however old, however deeply grooved into your nervous system, can be unlearned by a psyche willing to do the difficult and holy work of turning inward. This is the work I have devoted my life to describing, though I have never found a word for it that satisfies me entirely. I have called it individuation, which is simply the process by which a person becomes, in fact, who they already are in potential, not a new creation, but an excavation. You are not being asked to invent a self from nothing. You are being asked to remove what was never you in the first place. The mask must fall, not because it is evil, but because it is finished. It served its purpose. It kept you loved, or at least kept you safe, in a world that as a child you could not navigate any other way. but you are not a child any longer, and the strategies that protected the child are now, quite simply, too small for the adult who has outgrown them. Wearing a coat you wore at 7 years old will not keep you warm at 40. It will only bind your arms and remind you painfully of how much you have grown beyond it. So let the mask fall. I say this to you not as an instruction to be reckless, not as permission to become cold or withholding toward the people who love you, but as an invitation into the far more demanding and far more rewarding work of becoming visible. Visible first to yourself. This is where it must begin, because you cannot ask others to see the truth of you if you have not yet dared to look at it yourself. Sit some quiet evening with the simple and terrifying question of who you would be if no one needed anything from you, not who you would become if you stopped caring. You will never stop caring. That capacity is written into the very structure of your soul, and no amount of self-protection will erase it, nor should it. But who you would be if your caring were no longer compulsory, if it were a gift you chose to give rather than a toll you were forced to pay simply to remain acceptable in the eyes of others. I have watched people weep at this question, not from sorrow, but from the sheer unfamiliarity of being asked what they wanted after years, sometimes decades, of being asked only what they could provide. If this question moves something in you, do not push the feeling away. Follow it. It is leading you somewhere important. It is leading you toward the parts of yourself that were set aside so long ago. You may have forgotten they were ever set aside at all. The creative pursuits abandoned because they seemed frivolous next to the urgent needs of others. The friendships that quietly withered because you never once let yourself be the one who needed comforting. The desires you never spoke aloud because speaking them felt somehow like a betrayal of your role as the strong one, the steady one, the one who does not need. Let me be honest with you about what this reclamation will cost, because I have never believed in offering comfort without also offering the truth. Not everyone in your life will celebrate your unveiling. Some people love you precisely because of the mask you wear. They do not love you. They love your usefulness, your predictability, your endless capacity to absorb what they cannot hold. And when you begin, tentatively at first, and then with growing conviction, to set that mask aside, when you begin to say no where you once automatically said yes, when you begin to protect your own peace with the same fierceness you once reserved only for protecting theirs, some of these people will resist you. They may call you selfish, they may call you changed, as though change were an accusation rather than the very evidence of a life being lived honestly. They may grieve, quite sincerely, the loss of the version of you that asked nothing of them and gave everything to them. This grief is real, and I do not ask you to dismiss it, but I ask you to recognize it for what it is. It is grief for a role, not grief for you. The you beneath the mask was always there, waiting. What they are mourning is a performance, however beautifully you gave it. And a performance, no matter how long it ran, was never a fair trade for a life. There will also be relationships that do not survive this transformation. And I want to say something about this that may be difficult to hear, but that I believe with the whole of my conviction. A relationship that cannot survive your wholeness was never built to hold you in the first place. It was built to hold the mask, and a bond that depends upon your permanent self-erasure was never truly a bond between two people at all. It was an arrangement between one person and a costume, and costumes, however convincing, cannot love you back. This is not a reason for despair, it is a reason for hope, because it means that whatever relationships do survive the removal of the mask, and I promise you, some will, often the ones you least expect it to, those relationships will be built for the first time on something real. And there is no comparison, none whatsoever, between being loved for a performance and being loved for a presence. I want to turn now to something practical, that because I have never believed that transformation of the soul should remain only in the realm of the abstract. The work of letting the final mask fall begins in small, deliberate acts of honesty, acts so small they may seem almost trivial, and yet I have seen them cumulatively rebuild entire identities from the ground up. It begins the first time you allow a silence to sit in a conversation instead of rushing to fill it with reassurance you do not actually feel. It begins the first time you say, quite simply, I don't know, instead of offering the wise and comforting answer that people have come to expect from you, whether or not you actually possess that wisdom in the moment. It begins the first time you let someone see you struggle, rather than performing competence to spare them the discomfort of your humanity. Each of these acts will feel, at first, like a small betrayal of the role you have played so faithfully for so long. I promise you it is not a betrayal, it is a correction. It is the slow, patient work of realigning your outer conduct with your inner truth, and every act of this realignment, however small, is a nail removed from the coffin in which your authentic self has been quietly, patiently waiting. You must also learn, and this may be the hardest lesson of all, to tolerate the discomfort of other people's disappointment without immediately rushing to repair it. This is where so many of you falter, not from lack of courage, but from a lifetime of conditioning that has taught your nervous system that another person's disappointment is a fire you are obligated to extinguish, no matter the cost to yourself. I want to offer you a different way of seeing this. Another person's disappointment is not an emergency. It is simply a feeling, one they are entirely capable of holding, processing, and moving through, just as you have held, processed, and moved through countless feelings of your own that no one ever rushed in to rescue you from. Allowing someone to be disappointed in you and surviving that disappointment without collapsing into apology or self erasure is one of the most powerful acts of psychological maturity a human being can perform. It teaches your own soul, at last, that you are allowed to exist as something other than a source of comfort for everyone around you. I think often of the ancient image of the phoenix, not because I wish to romanticize suffering. I have no patience for the romanticizing of pain, having witnessed too much of it firsthand, but because the image captures something true about this process that no gentler metaphor quite achieves. The mask does not gently slip away one morning like mist burning off in sunlight. More often, it is consumed. There is a burning quality to this transformation, a period in which the old identity, the old role, the old performance must be allowed to fall entirely to ash before anything new can rise from what remains. This is why the moment of collapse I described at the very beginning of this speech is so often mistaken for catastrophe. It looks from the outside and often from the inside as well, like everything is ending. And in a sense, it is. The false self is ending. The performance is ending. The costume that has done your living for you for so many years is finally, mercifully, being allowed to burn. But what rises from that ash is not a diminished version of you. It is, without exception in every soul I have ever accompanied through this fire, more vivid, more grounded, more genuinely alive than the version that wore the mask so faithfully for so long. I want to say something now about the particular gift that empaths carry, because I fear that in speaking so extensively of the costs of the mask, I may have obscured the treasure that lies beneath it. Your sensitivity was never the problem. Let me repeat this, because I suspect some part of you has spent years believing the opposite. Your sensitivity was never the problem. The problem was never that you feel deeply, that you sense the undercurrents in a room before anyone speaks them aloud, that you carry an almost supernatural capacity for empathy that allows you to sit with another person's pain as though it were your own. This capacity is not a flaw to be managed. It is one of the rarest and most valuable instruments the human psyche can possess. The problem was never the gift itself. The problem was that the gift was conscripted, without your full consent, into a role that asked you to use it exclusively in the service of others, at the near total exclusion of yourself. What you are being called toward now is not the abandonment of your sensitivity. It is the liberation of it, the transformation of an instrument that was once used only defensively, only in service of managing the emotional lives of others, into an instrument you can finally, at long last, also turn toward your own inner world with the same tenderness and the same attention you have always so generously offered everyone else. Imagine, for a moment, extending to yourself the same quality of listening you have extended to every person who has ever wept in front of you. Imagine offering yourself the same patience you offer a friend in crisis, the same willingness to sit with discomfort without rushing to fix it, the same unconditional acceptance you have spent a lifetime perfecting on behalf of everyone but yourself. This is not narcissism. I want to be entirely clear about this because I know the fear that lurks beneath this invitation for so many of you. The fear that attending to your own inner life is somehow a betrayal of the compassionate person you have always tried to be. Narcissism is the inability to see beyond oneself. What I am describing is the opposite. It is the capacity, for the first time, to see yourself at all. You cannot betray compassion by including yourself within its circle. You can only complete it. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being endlessly understood by others while never being truly known, a loneliness that many of you have carried for so long you may have mistaken it for a simple, unchangeable feature of your existence, the price you pay for your gift. I want to tell you that this loneliness is not permanent, and it is not the price of your sensitivity. It is the price of the mask. It is the direct and inevitable consequence of showing the world a face constructed for their comfort, rather than a face that reflects your actual interior. And the loneliness will not lift through more performance, however skilled. It will not lift through becoming even more indispensable, even more understanding, even more available to the needs of others. It will lift only through the terrifying and necessary act of letting yourself be seen, not the version of you that manages everyone's discomfort with practiced grace, but the version of you that has needs, that has limits, that has an interior life every bit as complex and deserving of attention as the ones you have spent your life tending. I want to speak, before I close, to the particular fear that I suspect has been present throughout this entire address, quietly undermining every word of encouragement I have offered. The fear that if you truly let the mask fall, if you truly stop performing endless availability and boundless understanding, the people who depend on you will simply leave. I will not insult you by pretending this fear is baseless. Some will leave. I have already spoken to this. But I want you to consider a possibility that the mask has kept hidden from you for years. The people who leave when you finally become whole were never staying for you in the first place. They were staying for what you provided. And I ask you, with all the directness I can summon, whether a love that exists only on the condition of your permanent self-abandonment was ever truly love at all, or whether it was simply a transaction you mistook for intimacy because it was the only closeness you had ever been offered. The people who remain, and I promise you some will remain, often surprising you with the depth of their capacity to love you beyond the role you once played for them. Those people will teach you something the mask could never teach you. They will teach you that you are lovable, not for your usefulness, but for your existence. This is a lesson so foreign to many of you that it may take years to fully absorb it. You have spent so long earning love through performance that the idea of being loved simply for being present, simply for existing without constant output, may feel almost unbearable at first, like a kindness you have not yet learned how to receive. Learn to receive it anyway. This too is part of the work. The empath who has spent a lifetime giving must also, eventually, learn the far more difficult art of receiving, of allowing another person's care to land on you without immediately deflecting it, without immediately turning the conversation back toward their needs, without immediately finding some way to make yourself useful again so that you can tolerate being the object of someone else's attention. I have watched this transformation unfold in soul after soul across the whole of my working life, and I want to describe to you as clearly as I can what waits on the other side of it, because I think you deserve to know that this fire you are being called toward is not merely destructive. What waits on the other side is a kind of peace that the mask, for all its usefulness, could never provide. It is not the brittle, performed calm of a person managing everyone else's emotional weather. It is something quieter and far more durable. The peace of a person who has finally stopped fighting their own nature, who has finally stopped mistaking self-erasure for virtue, who has finally understood that the deepest compassion flows not from depletion but from wholeness. You will still feel deeply. You will still sense the currents beneath the surface of a room, still carry an extraordinary capacity for empathy that most of the world will never possess. But you will no longer be at the mercy of that sensitivity. You will have learned at last to wield it rather than be wielded by it. And here is the final thing I want to leave you with, the thing I believe with the whole of my conviction after a lifetime spent in the company of the human soul, in all its suffering and all its splendor. The falling of the mask is not a loss. I know it will feel like one in the raw and disorienting months when the old role no longer fits and the new self has not yet fully found its shape. I know there will be nights when you grieve the version of yourself that everyone found so easy to love, so convenient, so endlessly accommodating. But I promise you, with everything I have learned from bearing witness to this exact transformation in soul after soul, that what waits on the other side of that grief is not emptiness. It is the very thing you have spent your entire life trying to give to everyone else and never once received in full measure yourself. It is presence, it is wholeness, it is the astonishing, hard-won experience of walking through the world as yourself, fully, without apology, without performance, without the exhausting labor of managing what everyone around you feels before you have even had the chance to ask what you feel. I want to say one more thing about time, because I think impatience is the enemy of every soul attempting this passage. You will not remove a mask that took 30 years to construct in 30 days. There is no shortcut through this territory, no clever technique that spares you the slow and sometimes tedious work of relearning, situation by situation, conversation by conversation, what it means to answer honestly instead of automatically. Some days you will slip back into the old performance without even noticing, and you will catch yourself hours later, exhausted in the old familiar way, wondering how you ended up once again absorbing a burden that was never yours. Do not treat this as failure. Treat it as information. Every slip shows you exactly where the old grooves still run deepest, exactly where the child who first built this mask is still standing guard, still convinced that vigilance is the price of safety. Thank that child. Do not scorn her. Do not scorn him, for the strategies that once kept you whole in circumstances you did not choose and could not control. And then gently tell that child that the danger has passed, that the adult now standing in their place has resources they never had, and that it is safe at last to stand down. So let the mask fall. Let it fall not violently, not all at once, if that is not what your particular soul requires, but let it fall with intention, with courage, with the quiet and unshakable conviction that the self beneath it has been waiting far too long to finally step into the light. You were never meant to be a container for what others could not hold. You were never meant to disappear so completely into your usefulness that you forgot the shape of your own face. You are not the role you have played. You are not the endless availability, the boundless understanding, the smile that never cracked even when everything inside you was breaking. You are something far older, far deeper, and far more worthy of your own devoted attention than any mask could ever be. And when that final mask falls, and it will fall, because nothing false can be sustained forever against the relentless pressure of a soul insisting on its own truth, you will not find nothing waiting beneath it. You will find at long last yourself whole, undivided, and entirely unmistakably home.